knows that's probably not the case.
Congresswoman, thank you for coming on. I should note that we don't have evidence that Steyer leaked that video of you. If you have it, please.
Wait, did you just catch that? That's a mainstream anchor flat out challenging a sitting congresswoman on live TV. And the panic is absolutely insane. You cannot script this kind of political implosion.
Tom Steyer is the person who leaked the video with me and the staffer from 5 years ago. He pretty clearly didn't think that he pretty clearly wanted to be governor bad enough to knock me down to do it. And I've apologized for that video many times. Because I am confident that is the case. I've been told by many people it's a Department of Energy video. It was only held by the Department of Energy, and people can follow the trail to who his campaigns.
Okay, freeze it right there for a second. Did you hear what she just admitted? She flat out confirmed that the leaked video of her screaming at her own staffer is entirely real, but her only defense is to deflect and blame a billionaire rival. That's not a defense. Notice how she tries to downplay the severity by calling it a Department of Energy video, as if the location somehow excuses the completely unhinged behavior. And the sheer entitlement of claiming Tom Steyer wanted to be governor bad enough to knock her down. It's astonishing how she spins a massive lack of personal temperament into a fictional story where she is the ultimate martyr. She completely ignores the fact that everyday voters actually care about how leaders treat their teams behind closed doors. Instead of a genuine apology, she weaponizes the moment to attack a fellow Democrat. It shows you exactly what her core priorities are. She's so hyper-focused on destroying her opponent that she doesn't realize she's actively torpedoing her own credibility on national television. This right here is exactly why her poll numbers are completely tanking.
Has gotten it wrong generation after generation. The rights we enjoy right now are not because of 9 people on the Supreme Court. It's because people fought for them. And where the Supreme Court usually gets it wrong is when they're taking away rights, whether it's Korematsu with the internment of Japanese, whether it's Plessy versus Ferguson denying rights to African Americans, whether it's Dobbs.
Now pivot and look at this explosive moment from Cory Booker. The sheer theatrical energy he brings to these hearings is always off the charts. But if you listen closely to the words, it's incredibly dangerous rhetoric. He is essentially telling the American public that the Supreme Court, the highest legal authority in the country, has gotten it wrong generation after generation. He's actively undermining the legitimacy of the entire judicial system simply because they handed down a legal ruling his party didn't like. Think about the massive precedent that sets. Notice how he strategically lists historical atrocities like Japanese internment and pairs them with modern legal rulings on state congressional maps. He's deliberately using extreme emotional manipulation to conflate a standard redistricting decision with some of the darkest days in human history. It's a masterclass in political gaslighting. By framing a colorblind constitutional approach as taking away rights, he completely bypasses the actual legal reality. He doesn't want equal representation. He desperately wants guaranteed political outcomes. And the fact that he's screaming this into a microphone while pretending to defend democracy is peak irony.
Your answer to that?
Well, what troubles me the most is the level of ignorance among the people speaking. I know of Carville, he's deliberately misleading people. But when you played the clips of the black voters who believe that the Republicans are out to get them, it's Jim Crow all over again, it's just pure manipulation and deception because
Wow, she absolutely did not hold back for a single second. Dr. Carol Swain just completely dismantled the mainstream media narrative in less than 30 seconds flat. Pay close attention to her exact phrasing. She specifically calls out the level of ignorance and the pure manipulation being aggressively pushed by political operatives on TV. This is a crucial reality check. While politicians are out there screaming that the sky is falling and casually throwing around terms like Jim Crow to terrify voters, she calmly brings the entire conversation back to the actual facts. The Voting Rights Act was designed to prevent discrimination, not to permanently guarantee that districts are surgically drawn to elect one specific party based on demographics. The fact that the highest court is actually enforcing the Equal Protection Clause is somehow being spun as a massive tragedy by the left. But Dr. Swain sees right through the illusion. She recognizes that telling minority voters their rights are evaporating is a deliberate tactic to harvest votes through pure fear. It's wildly refreshing to hear someone completely reject the emotional hysteria.
Virginia Democratic leaders are going to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to overturn a state ruling striking down their new gerrymandered congressional map. The 4-3 decision at the Virginia Supreme Court, found that the Democratic-controlled legislature violated the Commonwealth's Constitution by not following clear and simple rules for a public vote.
Look at the sheer, unadulterated panic in this breaking broadcast. You can literally hear the urgency in the reporter's voice as they describe political leaders desperately scrambling to the U.S. Supreme Court. This is the ultimate political double standard right here. For months, we've watched these exact same politicians relentlessly bash the Supreme Court, calling it illegitimate and demanding radical ethical reforms. But the absolute second a state court strikes down their gerrymandered maps in Virginia, who do they immediately run crying to for help? The exact same Supreme Court they were just trashing. It completely exposes the hypocrisy of their entire platform. The Virginia State Court caught them violating their own Commonwealth's Constitution by blatantly ignoring clear rules, and instead of accepting that they broke the law, they demand an emergency federal bailout. It proves that their outrage is never actually about protecting democracy or fairness. It is exclusively about maintaining power by any means necessary. If a legal ruling benefits them, the system is flawless. If a ruling stops them from cheating the map, the system is fundamentally broken.
Major way today. But that was a rather obvious decision. I was surprised even today that you had 3 of the liberal dissenters saying, no, we don't want that. I mean, the court just said that these districts are forms of racial discrimination. And these liberal justices said, no, well, we should just stick with those districts because
This legal breakdown is exactly what the mainstream networks refuse to air on prime time. The analyst hits the nail right on the head by pointing out the unbelievable hypocrisy of the liberal dissenting justices. Think deeply about what he just laid out on the table. The court literally ruled that these voting districts were active forms of racial discrimination, yet the dissenting justices wanted to keep them in place anyway because changing them would be too confusing for the midterm elections. Seriously? That is their actual legal defense for maintaining unconstitutional, racially discriminatory maps. It is completely mind-boggling when you flip the script. As the analyst brilliantly points out, if these exact same maps were actively discriminating against a different demographic, there is zero chance those justices would just shrug their shoulders and say, well, let's just go ahead and vote in them anyway to avoid a headache. It exposes a massive, glaring double standard at the absolute highest levels of our judicial system. They are perfectly happy to let blatant discrimination slide right through the cracks if it secures their seats.
The other candidates in this race are a billionaire and a 35-year, 37-year career politician who's funded by corporations. I'm the candidate here who knows what it's like to drive a minivan, to push a shopping cart, to worry that your kids are not going to be able to afford to move out and will wind up living on your couch. And that's a perspective that's going to drive my laser focus on affordability in a way that I just don't think.
I seriously cannot get over how painfully calculated this entire television performance is. Notice her aggressive hand gestures and the forced, overly folksy tone. She's trying so incredibly hard to sell this manufactured image of a relatable, everyday mom driving a minivan and pushing a shopping cart through the grocery store. But it comes across as so robotic and heavily rehearsed, doesn't it? She's desperately trying to contrast herself with the billionaires in the race, but the entire monologue feels like it was written in a corporate PR boardroom by a team of consultants. And the craziest part about the whole thing? It completely ignores the reality of her own deeply flawed record. You don't get to pretend you're a humble outsider battling the elite when you have deep ties to the political establishment and a track record of toxic behavior behind the scenes. She wants voters to focus entirely on her laser focus on affordability, while completely blinding them to the chaos and lack of accountability that follows her everywhere she goes. It's the ultimate political theater.
The latest in a series of redistricting controversies to reach the Supreme Court. Here, Democratic officials in Virginia are asking the Supreme Court to reinstate a congressional map that would benefit Democrats ahead of this year's midterm elections. Now, this emergency appeal, it follows a decision from the Virginia Supreme Court last week that voided Democrats' attempt to redraw the state's U.S. House.
Here we go again with the frantic emergency appeals. Look closely at how this situation is being framed by the media. The political operatives in Virginia literally got caught red-handed trying to redraw the state's map to directly benefit themselves ahead of the midterms, and the state court entirely voided the attempt. So, what is their immediate reaction? They draft a letter claiming the decision is deeply mistaken and holds profound practical importance. Let me translate that for you. That's just political speak for we are going to lose our seats and we are absolutely terrified of a fair fight. The sheer, undeniable desperation to put the state court's order on hold shows you that they know they can't win on a legally balanced map. They rely entirely on these tilted, gerrymandered districts to hold on to their grip of power, and the moment a legitimate court steps in to enforce the actual law, it becomes a national state of emergency. They aren't arguing that the map is fair. They are arguing that losing the map ruins their strategy.
Last month's blockbuster Supreme Court decision limiting the extent to which race can be used to determine voting districts. Now here, the state of Alabama went back to the Supreme Court and said, hey, based on that ruling, we want to go back to our 2023 map, which has only one majority black district. And here, there's no explanation, right? This isn't a major opinion where they have to.
Watch the reporter's face as he tries to process this monumental legal shift on live TV. The state of Alabama going back to their map is a massive constitutional earthquake, and you can tell the network is heavily struggling to spin the narrative. He explicitly mentions that this completely limits the extent to which race can be used to determine voting districts. That is the core of the entire issue right there. For decades, political operatives have carved up the map based purely on demographics to mathematically lock in guaranteed outcomes. But now, the Supreme Court is finally slamming the brakes on that exact practice, forcing states to actually adhere to a strictly colorblind standard. It's a complete and total return to constitutional basics, but because it aggressively disrupts the established power structure, the media covers it like it's a terrifying tragedy. Notice how they always subtly frame a return to neutral legal district drawing as a consequence. They can't just report the raw facts. They have to inject the idea that following the law is somehow dangerous.
Common cause decision where the Supreme Court says, hey, yeah, partisan gerrymandering is anti-democratic, but we're not going to do anything about it. And now they're allowing this race. Well, this election has to be about those fundamental rights. Not right or wrong, but will Americans have basic fundamental rights like the right to vote and the right to fair representation?
And just to cap it all off, we have Cory Booker returning for an encore of pure, unfiltered political hysteria. He literally looks dead into the camera lens and says the upcoming election has to be about whether everyday Americans will have basic fundamental rights. Think deeply about how insane that statement truly is. No one, literally no one, is taking away the right to vote. The legal debate is entirely and exclusively about how geographical lines are drawn on a map for congressional districts. But he intentionally distorts that legal reality to convince people that their very ability to cast a ballot is under a massive threat. It is the cheapest, lowest form of political manipulation imaginable. He knows that if he can make people angry and terrified, they won't actually read the Supreme Court ruling or look at the basic facts of the case. They'll just blindly react based on the panic he's artificially creating. It's a deeply cynical strategy that relies on keeping the public misinformed, but the courts are finally waking up to the illusion. The whole system is glitching right before our eyes. Drop a comment below on who you think is panicking the most, and hit subscribe before this gets taken down. See you in the next one.